نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد فإن أحسن الكلام كلام الله وخير الهدى هدى محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وإن شر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار. So last lesson we looked at the statement of Imam Tahaawiyyah, وَلَا يَفْنَى وَلَا يَبِيد, that Allah does not perish. Both of these words have the same meaning. وَلَا يَفْنَى, He does not perish. وَلَا يَبِيد, meaning the same thing, He does not perish or expire. And likewise, وَلَا يَكُونُ إِلَّا مَا يُرِيد, and nothing takes place except what He wishes. So the first sentence, we spoke about that, and we had this discussion about Allah being eternal, Allah always having His attributes from eternity, and Allah always being one who acts with whatever He wills, speaks with whatever He wills. And so this is what is meant, although At-Tahaawiyyah is speaking about Allah not expiring or Allah not perishing, right, meaning that He is eternal in the future, then likewise the same thing applies, that Allah does not have any beginning. We said that this statement here, وَلَا يَفْنَى وَلَا يَبِيد, is an explanation of the previous sentence, قَدِيمٌ بِلَا إِبْتِدَاء دَائِمٌ بِلَا إِنْتِهَاء. If you remember that particular lesson, that Allah is eternal without beginning and everlasting without end. And so that statement there, we spoke about that subject, about infinite events in the past, infinite events in the future, and how the whole Aqeedah or the creed of these people, the Ahlul Kalam, is built around those principles. The second sentence was وَلَا يَكُونُ إِلَّا مَا يُرِيد, that nothing takes place except what He wishes. This essentially is qadr. The whole of al-qadr, al-qada wal-qadr, is encapsulated in this statement. وَلَا يَكُونُ إِلَّا مَا يُرِيد. وَلَا يَكُونُ, nothing occurs, which means everything in the creation, whatever Allah has decreed from His qadr, إِلَّا مَا يُرِيد, that everything is under Allah's irada. And we said in the last lesson, we spoke about the irada and the mashi'ah. Irada and the mashi'ah. We said that with respect to Allah's irada, it is of two types: the irada kawniyya and the irada shar'iyya. Irada kawniyya is whatever takes place in the creation. So anything that takes place in the creation, whether it is the kufr of a kafir, or the iman of a mu'min, the iman of a believer, the Islam of a Muslim, or the ridda of an apostate, or the piety of a pious Muslim, or the sinfulness of a sinful Muslim, and likewise every other event that takes place, whether it be an earthquake, a volcano, whatever else, whether it's evil, whether it's good, all of that is from Allah. Allah wishes it to and brings it into existence. And it is not necessary that Allah loves everything He brings into existence. Okay? And then the second type of irada is irada shar'iyya. The irada shar'iyya, which is whatever Allah has requested from His servants. Right? Whatever Allah has requested from His servants, from fulfilling the obligations and keeping away from the prohibitions. And Allah loves whatever He orders or prohibits by way of His irada shar'iyya. Okay? And so, in many instances, the irada kawniyya and the irada shar'iyya can come together. They coincide. Right? So for example, if a person was to establish the prayer, if he was to establish the prayer, then Allah has decreed that He will establish the prayer by way of His irada kawniyya. So Allah has brought that entire situation into existence where, he's born and he reaches the age of puberty, and then he, obligations upon him, He gives him the means, and then He wills that he prays. But at the same time, that servant has also acted upon the irada shar'iyya. So both iradas of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have been fulfilled. So the difference here is in respect to sin and disobedience, and only one of the types of the irada take place. So as far as irada's kawniyya is established, then yes, that action, that evil, that sin, be that shirk or kufr or disobedience or innovation or whatever else, that took place by way of Allah's irada kawniyya. And Allah dislikes that action, right? And His irada shar'iyya, then it was not fulfilled. Okay, and Allah only loves that which is in accordance with His irada shar'iyya. So anyway, we spoke about that in some detail in the last lesson, but that topic there وَلَا يَكُونُ إِلَّا مَا يُرِيد. Then all that Tahaawi is doing after the initial where he mentioned the aspects of Tawheed at the beginning, he's just mentioning some of the characteristics and the qualities of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So from them he mentioned that Allah is eternal and doesn't have any beginning, doesn't have any end, nothing occurs in his creation except what he wishes. And so here we come to some other issues then, the next two sentences of what Imam al-Tahaawi said. So he says, لا تبلغه الأوحام ولا تدركه الأفحام ولا يشبه الأنام. Okay, so the next two sentences, he says that the imaginations cannot reach him. The imaginations cannot reach him. And nor can the understandings or the comprehensions, nor can they comprehend him. Nor can they grasp him or comprehend him. Okay? لا تبلغه الأوحام, that the imagination cannot reach him, that the imaginations cannot reach him. وَلَا تُدْرِكُهُ الْأَفْهَامِ, and the understandings cannot grasp him or comprehend him. وَلَا يُشْبِهُ الْأَنَامِ, and the creation does not resemble him. And he does not resemble the creation. Okay, so first of all, as usual, we go through the brief commentary of Shaykh Salih Al-Fawzan, Hafidhahullah Ta'ala. And so he says that this statement here really, that the imagination cannot reach him and the comprehension cannot grasp him, then this means that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He is greater and mightier than that anyone or anything should be able to actually grasp Him, meaning to fully comprehend Him, right? To completely surround Him in knowledge and grasp Him in knowledge, right? Just like we can grasp things which are from the worldly affairs, and gain more or less complete knowledge, or as much knowledge in a manner that more or less, where we have comprehended that thing, then this is impossible with respect to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah cannot be comprehended, nor can He be grasped, because Allah is greater and mightier than that anything or anyone should be able to grasp Him and grasp His reality and grasp the complete knowledge and understanding of Him. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Taha, يَعْلَمُ مَا بَيْنَ أَيْدِيهِمْ وَمَا خَلْفَهُمْ وَلَا يُحِيطُونَ بِهِ عِلْمًا. So Allah says that He knows that which is before them and that which is behind them. And then He says, and this is the point of evidence, وَلَا يُحِيطُونَ بِهِ عِلْمًا, and they do not comprehend Him in knowledge. They do not grasp Him in knowledge. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, although we can have some knowledge of Him, He can be known, but He cannot be comprehended. That's the difference. That we can have knowledge of Him, and Allah has given us certain knowledge about Himself, His names, His attributes, His actions. We have that knowledge, and we can understand to a certain degree or enough to be able to worship Allah and to recognize Him as our Lord and Creator, and to worship Him and to love Him and to fear Him and to and so on and so forth. So that much we have been given and we have been informed. But as for being comprehended, this is what we call ihata. Ihata is comprehension, to completely comprehend and surround something. So that is impossible and denied for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But as for ilm, as for having knowledge, ma'rifah and ilm of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then obviously we have been given something of that knowledge. And so therefore we only speak about Allah based upon that knowledge that we have been given, which has come by way of the prophets and messengers. So whatever Allah said about Himself, whatever the messenger said about Himself, then we speak on the basis of that. And as for the second statement, وَلَا يُشْبِهُ الْأَنَامِ, then the Shaykh says that this again is similar to a previous statement. If you remember at the beginning, there was a statement, وَلَا شَيْءَ مِثْلُهُ, وَلَا شَيْءَ مِثْلُهُ, there is nothing which resembles Him. Then this statement, وَلَا يُشْبِهُ الْأَنَامِ, that He does not resemble the creation. He doesn't resemble the creation. So this is similar to something which is already preceded at the beginning. And so here the Shaykh explains that al-anam in the Arabic, وَلَا يُشْبِهُ الْأَنَامِ, al-anam, it means the creation. Al-anam is just another name for the creation. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is free and purified from that he should resemble the creation, as Allah says, لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ وَهُوَ السَّمِيعُ الْبَصِيرُ. There is nothing which is a likeness to him, and he is all hearing, all seeing. And likewise Allah says, وَلَمْ يَكُلْ لَهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٍ, that there is nothing which is an equal, co-equal to him. Surah Ikhlas. And so again, we should remember that we said before that even though in terms of the meanings of Allah's names and His attributes, that we understand the meanings, and there is a similarity to a certain degree between Allah's names and attributes and our names and attributes, in the sense that the meanings are common to a certain degree. They are common to a certain degree, enough for us to understand what Allah is described with, and for us to love Him and know Him and so on and so forth. And there is a similarity in the meaning. But that doesn't mean that the similarity in that meaning means that there is the similarity in the reality between Allah and His creation. And so this is what the Shaykh has said, Shaykh Salih al-Fawzan. And as for Shaykh Salih al-Shaykh, then the Shaykh first of all explains that this first statement, لا تبلغه الأوهام ولا تدركه الأفهام, that the imaginations cannot reach him, nor can the understandings grasp him, or the intellects grasp him, or the comprehension grasp him. This is a refutation of two groups of people. First of all, it is a refutation of the Mu'attilah. The Mu'attilah are those who deny Allah's names and attributes. And likewise, it is a refutation of the Mujassima. The Mujassima who liken Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to the creation. So as for the meaning of the statement, it means لا تبلغه الأوهام. Al-awham here, al-awham, is the plural of wahm. Wahm just means imagination, some thought or imagination that comes in your mind. And so what it means is that when a person, he starts thinking in his mind, and he starts, his imagination starts flowing, and he starts thinking and he starts picturing things and imagining things in his mind, then it is not possible for him by way of that activity to come to describe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or to reach how Allah is truly described, or to reach how Allah's essence is. It is impossible by way of that action in the mind, right? Just by sitting, imagining, thinking, passing thoughts through the mind, passing pictures through the mind, right? This is impossible for the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for a person to reach the knowledge and description of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And likewise, as to how is Allah's essence, how is Allah's being, how is Allah's self, this is all impossible. And this is the meaning of what Imam al-Tahaawiyyah is saying, وَلَا تَبْلُغُهُ الْأَوْهَامِ. And so this, the Shaykh mentions a verse, لَا تُدْرِكُهُ الْأَبْصَارِ وَهُوَ يُدْرِكُ الْأَبْصَارِ. This verse in Surah Al-An'am, Surah 6, verse 103. In this verse, Allah says that the visions, Al-Absar here in this verse, Al-Absar, it is used in two meanings, as we shall see a little later, inshaAllah ta'ala. It's verse, Surah 6, verse 103. So, لَا تُدْرِكُهُ الْأَبْصَارِ, that the visions, Absar, cannot grasp him. But Absar can mean the vision of the eyes, and it can also mean in terms of the understanding. Right? So this verse is negating both things. That the awham, the imaginations, can grasp him, can reach him, and that the afham, or meaning the understandings, can come to comprehend him. So this verse is a proof. This is actually the proof for the statement of Imam al-Tahawi. This verse is a proof of the statement of Imam al-Tahawi. لا تدركه الأبصار وهو يدرك الأبصار. That the visions cannot grasp him, but he is the one who grasps all the visions. Okay, so in other words, no matter how much a person or a servant thinks, no matter what thought he passes through his mind, and likewise with his understandings, the fahm, no matter how much he tries to analogize in his mind, no matter how much he tries to compare between things, then it is impossible for him to arrive at that knowledge. So this short statement really is a refutation of two groups of people. First of all, the Mujassima. The Mujassima are the ones who treated Allah to be like whatever we see amongst the creation, the bodies amongst the creation. And likewise the Mu'attila, those who denied everything or anything or something of which Allah described Himself with. And these people, the Mu'attila, the reason why they denied what Allah is described with is because in their mind, when they hear what Allah is described with, then they pictured in their mind that meaning to be in the specific form in which it is found in the creation. Right? So this is what their minds did first. In other words, their minds, they likened between Allah's creation and between Allah. This is what they did. And then when this thought occurred in their minds, they then said, this is false. Allah can't be described with this. So on that basis, they denied Allah's attributes. Right? So, like for example, they see Allah mentions, Allah shows mercy. Allah is merciful. Allah shows mercy to His servant. And then when they think of mercy, then they're thinking of mercy in their mind. They are thinking of the mercy which is found in the creation, and which can be a weakness. Sometimes mercy can be a weakness. A man, he feels compelled to be merciful. Merciful is like a feeling that overwhelms him. Or likewise, pleasure. When they see that Allah has been described with pleasure, then in their mind, they think of pleasure with the reality that is found in the creation. Right? And they think that this Allah can't be described with this. So therefore they deny this attribute of Allah, of Allah, such as pleasure and love and mercy. And so this is the Mu'attila. Right? It means that they resembled first in their minds, then they had to then they denied it because it felt repugnant and evil in their hearts that Allah should be described with such things. So this statement really is a refutation of both groups, that the imaginations cannot reach Him, nor can the understandings grasp Him, because each of these groups really has fallen foul of this principle or this statement, which itself is based upon the Quran, that statement of Allah that we mentioned in Surah Al-An'am. And there's a third group as well. There's a third group, in fact, who are also refuted by the statement, and they are the Sufis. The Sufis. And these Sufis, they also have an idea, the Sufis, which is, and really they've taken this idea from the philosophers, the Greek philosophers and other people, which is, what they claim is that by exercising, by doing exercises and spiritual exercises and physical exercises, that a person can open up avenues to further knowledge. To further knowledge which doesn't really come through revelation. Right? And so they claim that a person, when he starts practicing these spiritual exercises, eventually what will happen is they call it al-fana. Al-fana is that basically you perish in the sense that you move to another level of realization, like in knowledge. And you no longer see everything around you as the created and the creation. Right? And the barrier is now no longer there between you and between knowing and seeing Allah directly. Right? So by way of these spiritual exercises, you reach this level, and once you reach this level, it is as if now all those physical barriers are now gone, and it is as if you are seeing Allah directly. Everything you see is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Everything you see is the attribute of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is the Sufis. And so therefore, it means that whatever they are looking at is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And, so this again is batil, it is false, and it falls foul of this principle, which says that the imaginations cannot reach Him, nor can the understandings come to grasp Him. But this is the third group that we should be aware of, that they also fall foul into this, with respect to this principle. Okay, now there are a number of principles the Shaykh mentions here, and he's going to speak here about knowledge and how do we acquire knowledge, right? So this is something that you should pay attention to. He says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in the Quran, this is the first issue that we're discussing, the first mas'ala that we're discussing. So he says, Allah mentions in the Quran, وَاللَّهُ أَخْرَجَكُم مِّن بُطُونِ أُمَّهَاتِكُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ شَيْئًا وَجَعَلَ لَكُمُ السَّمْعَ وَالْأَبْصَارَ وَالْأَفْئِدَةَ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَشْكُرُونَ. Okay, in this verse, which is in Surah An-Nahl, Surah 16, verse 78, in this verse, Allah mentions the basic principle regarding mankind and knowledge. This is a basic principle. So in this verse, Allah says, Allah brought you out from the wombs of your mothers. Allah brought you out from the wombs of your mothers whilst you did not know anything. And then He made for you the faculties of hearing and seeing and feeling and understanding. Al-Af'idah, meaning the faculty of understanding and feeling. لَعَلَّكُمْ تَشْكُرُونَ, in order that you may be grateful. So now this verse establishes the basic foundation in terms of knowledge. So this verse basically means that mankind is born being ignorant, having no knowledge whatsoever. Then Allah gave him certain faculties, the faculties of hearing and seeing and feeling and grasping and understanding. And then through those faculties, gradually and step by step, he begins to acquire knowledge. Right? So knowledge, the acquisition of knowledge is a gradual step-by-step thing by way of the faculties that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given to mankind. Okay, that's the basic principle. Now, from this point, how does mankind acquire knowledge? How does mankind grasp knowledge? What is the basic route and what is the basic process through which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has granted mankind to the ability to acquire knowledge and to acquire understanding? The Shaykh says that this type of knowledge, or this theory, the Shaykh mentions that even the philosophers themselves have a theory as to how mankind acquires knowledge. And this theory is largely correct because it agrees with what we know in the Quran and the Sunnah, right? At a broad level. So how does mankind acquire knowledge? This is done in two ways. First of all, the first way is by way of the five senses. Okay, so with the five senses we mean touch and seeing and smell and taste and hearing. Right, the five senses. And so this type of knowledge, this is the first type of knowledge that a person, or as a child, as a baby, that a person begins to acquire knowledge of the outside world. Right? So we find that as a baby, we find that this is the primary route, right? In terms of touch, sense, smell, hearing, seeing, right? This is the basic interaction with the world, and this is how a child begins. The second level now is once these five senses, a person interacts with what is around him with these five, through these five senses, and the sense of touch and smell and hearing and seeing and taste, then we see that the aql, right, it now comes into play, and the aql now begins to make comparisons about what it's felt and touched and heard and smelt and tasted. It now starts analogizing, and it starts to compare, as a result of which what we call fahm. Fahm begins to, or aql, it begins to accrue in the person's mind. It begins to develop and grow in the person's mind. And so we find from this that the second one, the fahm and the aql, is based upon the first one. Right? Is based upon the first one. And the second one, which is the fahm, this is when, for example, a person, the things that he's already come into contact with by way of what he has seen, by way of what he has heard, by way of what he has smelt, by way of what he has felt and touched and whatever, that in his mind he now starts basically making comparisons and analogies, and as a result of which he now starts acquiring ma'rifah, or knowledge of things. And to help you understand this, To help you understand this, say for example, a person, he might see a pillar, or he might see any object. He sees a pillar, for example, and he sees that the pillar is a certain size and a certain bulk, right? And then he sees another pillar somewhere else, right? And then he now, in his mind, he's comparing between, well, that's a large one and that's a small one. That's made of marble. This is made of, something else, limestone, whatever, right? So now he starts making comparison in his mind. But the asl in the beginning, it all originated from the basic five senses, right? And likewise, we can see. So now, when he starts making in his mind comparisons, that's smaller than this, that's larger than that one's harder than this one, that's weaker than this one, this is, and so he starts making these comparisons, and this is where we start now bringing in, this is where the fahm comes in, and, he gets an additional layer of knowledge above the five senses. Another example here is, like, for example, between colours, a person compares between colours, so he sees yellow, green, red, blue, like a child, it sees yellow, green, red, blue, so the vision goes in, and then in the mind, it starts distinguishing, well, that's different to that one, that's different to that one, this is lighter than that one, that's darker than that one, and so on and so forth. And so now, there's another layer of knowledge that sits on top of the basic five senses. So, and the same thing with touch. You touch something, it is hot, you touch something, it is cold, you touch something, it's in between, and now, this is what you feel with a sense of touch, but in your mind you're able to distinguish that's hot, that's cold, and you're able to speak with those terms, right? So this is another layer of knowledge. So the point here, really, the point that the Shaykh is getting across is that this basic idea as to how knowledge is acquired, because this is how knowledge is acquired. Even like a child, as a baby, it begins. And it just knows the basic things, mainly through the five senses, right? The fahm hasn't really developed up, it starts to develop gradually and slowly, right? So you see the children, slowly, you might see them at the age of 1.5, 1, they start, you can see that the fahm now and the understanding about certain things, it recognizes a certain word, or it can distinguish between two colors or whatever. That now starts to kick in, and from that point we see that the fahm begins to grow and develop, and the knowledge and the ma'rifah begins to increase in the child. This basically is just a general theory of knowledge which non-Muslim philosophers mention, and it's correct, it's in agreement with what we see in the book and the sunnah, that we come out ignorant, and through the faculties of hearing, seeing, and the senses and understanding, that we start acquiring knowledge. And obviously the intent behind all of that is that we are grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But from this, now what is the point of all of this discussion, and where are we leading to? What is the point of mentioning all of this? The point of mentioning all of this now then is that we come to the conclusion that it is not possible for a person to reach the knowledge of something, for his imagination to reach something, or his fahm to grasp something. It is impossible except in one of four ways. There's only four ways. Like in light of what we've just discussed about the way as to how knowledge is acquired, then within this context we come to the conclusion that knowledge can only be acquired in one of four ways, given the fact that this is how mankind acquires knowledge, right? The first way, number one, is that he sees something. Or secondly, he perceives it with any of his senses, with any of the five senses, or the remaining, four senses, right? The third way is that if he does not see it himself directly, then he sees something like it. He sees something that is like it, or something that resembles it. And so therefore he can compare between the two. Okay? And this is like, for example, have you ever seen an Eskimo? Well, I've never seen an Eskimo, but I've seen someone from the Far East who has Mongoloid features and whatever. And so, so you haven't seen an Eskimo, but you've seen something that, or someone is kind of like an Eskimo, right? So that's another way that you can acquire, a knowledge of something which you haven't seen directly. And that's the third way. And the fourth way is that you haven't seen something which is like it or resembles it, but you are able to make an analogy through something else. You're able to make an analogy through something else. Like, this is like, for example, we might say, have you ever seen a certain fruit that grows, for example, in the Caribbean? Right? You've never seen that fruit. Right? You never heard of that fruit before. You've never seen that fruit. And well, then someone might start describing it to you. Well, they say, well, okay, basically it's about the same size as an apple. It's, got like a reddish, creamish type of color, and it tastes like such and such. And then in your mind, what you're doing is now, while that person's describing it, in your mind, you're now trying to make analogies and comparisons between the sum whole of your previous experience. So maybe an apple flashes through your mind, maybe the taste of an apple flashes through your mind, maybe the taste of a pear flashes through your mind. And so as that person is describing something to you which you have never seen before, your mind is now trying to come to some fahm by way of analogies and comparisons, so that you can get a basic idea of what is this thing that you've never seen before. Likewise, another example here would be like an animal. Maybe there's a type of animal that you've never heard of before, you've never seen before, maybe a type of fish that you've never heard of before, never seen before. And then so someone starts describing it to you. So obviously you've never seen it, you've never seen something like it either, or something that resembles it either, but you're trying to get something from your knowledge that, that someone's describing to you, that, okay, it's got a long neck like a giraffe, it's got a huge body, it's, probably shorter than an elephant. And then in your mind, again, you're now trying to grasp something. So the point here then is, knowledge can only be acquired by any one of these four ways. Okay. And so just to summarize then, number one, you've either got to see it. Number two, you perceive it with any of the five senses, or the remaining four senses. Number three, you see in something that is just like it, or which resembles it. Or number four, you've never seen anything which is like it or resembles it, but you make analogies in your mind through something else which you have seen and which you do have knowledge of. Okay, so now that we've established this, as it relates to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, has anybody seen Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? No. Okay, so the first route is denied. The first route to knowledge of Allah is denied. Has anyone perceived Allah with any of the senses? No. So the second route is now denied for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Is there a likeness or a resemblance to Allah? Does anybody exist? Of course not. There is nothing which resembles Allah, nothing which is like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the third route to knowledge is also denied. And the fourth route to knowledge, can analogies be made for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? For Him, with what is in the creation? And the answer is no. No. So now, we've found that all four routes to knowledge, which are themselves built upon the how mankind acquires knowledge, the two stages, first of all through the five senses, and then the level of fahm when a person uses what comes in through the five senses to reflect in his mind, that we said that all of this is completely denied as it relates to knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it means that the ma'rifah, the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is completely out of the scope of mankind through these particular ways, through these four ways. And for that reason, for this very reason, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He sent the messengers. He sent the messengers to explain to mankind the attributes of their Lord, the attributes of their Creator, because He has never been seen, He has never been perceived by any of the senses, there's never been seen anything which is like Him, because there is anything which is like Him or which resembles Him, and nor can any analogy be made for Him from anything else. Therefore, Allah sent the messengers. Allah sent the messengers, He revealed the books, and this is what is meant then. This therefore is an explanation of this statement of Imam al-Tahaawi, La tablughuhu al-awham, wa la tudrikuhu al-afham, that the wahm, that the awham, the imagination, cannot reach Him, and nor can the understandings, can they grasp Him. And this shows then that this is the first issue that we wanted to raise. And the second issue that we are going to raise is that the difference between al-awham and al-afham. Al-awham and al-afham. Al-awham, the singular is al-wahm. Al-wahm. And al-afham, the singular is al-fahm. Al-fahm. Wahm is imagination. Is imagination. This goes back to something that a person just imagines in his mind. He pictures in his mind. Okay, you picture something in your mind. This is something different to fahm. Fahm is something you understand, you come to understand in your mind. Okay? So the wahm goes back to khiyal. Khiyal is to picture something in your mind. Right? That's wahm. Right? So this is denied for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And as for the fahm, what do we mean by fahm? What do we mean to understand something? What do we mean by that? When we understand something, it means that in our minds we have made an analogy for it and we've compared it to something else. This is what it means to understand. Right? So the point we're making here is that these are two different things. The wahm is to picture something in the mind, and the fahm is to grasp and understand something in the mind. They are two separate things. And so here, both of these things have been denied, and both of these things are being referred to in the statement of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when He said, لا تدركه الأبصار وهو يدرك الأبصار. Right? That the visions cannot grasp Him, but He is the one who grasps all visions. And as we said before, the word al-absar, it has two meanings here. It has the meaning of not seeing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with the vision of the eyes, but it also has the meaning of not grasping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with the understanding, with the fahm. Right? So it's both wahm and it's both fahm. Now these are denied with respect to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so therefore, the Shaykh says that al-wahm is cut off and al-fahm is cut off. And this is why some of the Salaf, they used to say, مَا خَطَرَ بِبَالِكَ فَاللَّهُ بِخِلَافِ ذَلِكَ. Whatever occurs in your mind of any thought or idea or imagination, then indeed Allah is different to that. This is what the Salaf used to say. Right? And this is because, as we've established now from what has preceded in this lesson, it is not possible for a person to imagine in his mind or to think of anything about Allah based upon the theory of the acquisition of knowledge. Meaning, in the manner that we described, how does he acquire knowledge as a child, being ignorant and then growing up, how does he acquire knowledge? That upon that basis, upon that method, it is impossible for a man to acquire that knowledge. That knowledge is impossible. And so therefore this comes back down to this issue then, which is that this knowledge only comes from the messengers, only comes from the prophets and the messengers and the real books. And it shows that the mind and the intellect likewise, and the wahm, the imagination likewise, all of these are outside of the scope of providing knowledge about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But obviously here is something that we need to just clarify, which we also mentioned in a previous lesson, which is, as we said, that sound reason can come to some knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We're not saying that it is impossible to come to have some restricted type of knowledge about Allah, because we can, just through pure reason, come to know, for example, that Allah is living, that Allah has a wish, Allah has irada, that Allah has ilm. This is from reason that we know that Allah has ilm, and that Allah has qudra, Allah has power. These basic attributes, we can through reason, we can come to arrive at this type of knowledge at a very limited level. But in principle, knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cannot be grasped, cannot be comprehended, by way of the mind and the way and the fahm and the wahm and the aql and the way that we mentioned how mankind acquires knowledge. All of this is impossible. And so this really, this whole discussion really, where are we going with this discussion? What is the point of all of this discussion? What is the core point that we are making here? The core point here is the difference between the methodology of the Salaf with respect to how do they speak about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala compared to the groups of innovation, compared to the Mu'attila, compared to those who deny Allah's names and attributes like the Jahmiyyah and the Mu'tazila and the Ash'ariyah and the Maturidiyah, and compared to the Mujassima, those who liken Allah to the creation, and those who liken Allah's attributes, the Mushabbiha, who liken Allah's attributes to the creation or resemble them to the creation, or who claim Allah is a body, like we have like other created things. Then obviously our speech about Allah is different to them, and this is based upon this whole discussion that we've had today, based upon this speech of Imam Tahawi, that it is impossible for mankind and the way how he acquires knowledge for him to comprehend Allah in knowledge, or even for him to learn about Allah's names and attributes in a detailed sense. And so this brings us to the end of this statement, لا تبلغه الأوهام ولا تدركه الأفهام. And as for the next statement, ولا يشبه الأنام, and he does not resemble the creation, then this again is a sentence which is very similar to the statement before, ولا شيء مثله. And about this, I refer you back to that discussion. And again, this meaning is straightforward, that there is nothing which resembles Allah in His essence, nor in His names, nor in His attributes, nor in His actions, and nothing from the creation resembles Him in that regard. Although, when we speak about resemblance, we are speaking about the resemblance in the reality of the affairs. We're not speaking about resemblance in meaning. If you remember, we already discussed in previous lessons that there is a certain degree of similarity in the meaning. And without that similarity and resemblance in meaning, then it would be impossible for us to have any knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So anyone who denies the meanings, then he's basically denying any knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He is depriving the hearts of coming to know Allah, coming to love Allah, coming to hope in Allah, coming to fear Allah. So what we say, that when we say that nothing resembles Him, we are speaking here in two senses. Number one, in the reality of how the attribute is, the kayfiyya, the haqiqah, the reality and the how it is, and nothing resembles Allah's attributes in any of that. But as for the meaning, then there is to a certain degree a similarity in the meaning, right? But as for the complete and perfect meaning, then again we do not grasp that. To give you an example, when we speak about Allah's knowledge, and we speak about our knowledge, right, there's a certain degree of shared meaning in that, where you can understand what knowledge is, you know what knowledge is, right? But then there's a higher level of the meaning, as in what is the meaning of knowledge in a complete and perfect sense as with Allah. But we don't know what that is. We don't know what that is. We don't have that knowledge. But we know that there's a certain degree, there's a shared similarity in the meaning, and it's because of that we are able to know Allah and know about things in the unseen that we can't see. Like for example, the soul we have never seen, but we know that the soul can speak and it can hear, and we know that the soul, it has a smell as well. But do we understand how that is? Do we know how that is? We don't even know what the soul is made of. What is the substance? We don't know that. If we don't know that, then how does it have attributes? How can it speak? Right? This is completely outside of our knowledge. If this is the case for a created thing, which is the soul, then how much more so for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And what we mean here is that Allah is indeed described with meanings which have a degree of resemblance to the meanings we have in the creation. But as for the reality of how those meanings or those attributes exist with Him, then Allah knows best. And so this really is the position of Ahlul Sunnati wal Jama'ah, opposed to all of these different groups. And it's an issue that Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah discusses in detail in his book At-Tadmuriyah, and you can refer back to that. And so this brings us to the end of this lesson. And so really what we've covered here then, again, we see that At-Tahawi really in essence has laid down some principles of methodology as it relates to how do we speak about Allah, how do we arrive at knowledge regarding Allah. And so with that we conclude today's lesson. If there's any questions, inshallah ta'ala, we have a few minutes. Otherwise we'll conclude there, inshallah.